when everything's going well, where life is happy, we're happy to go along with that. But what about when it's not so happy? What about when life throws us things that goes against everything that we want and everything that we desire? Well, this happened with Peter. And you remember that when in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they came, and isn't that wonderful? You look up tonight, you'll see the full moon. Okay, the Passover's always on the full moon because it's a lunar calendar, right? It always happens in the same phase of the moon. Anyway, so when they came in the Garden of Gethsemane, how did they see these people? They're in the valley, the Garden of Gethsemane. They may have had torches, but Judas says, when I go and kiss, the one whom I kiss is Jesus. And he did that. And so they could see one another. When the soldiers of the Sanhedrin came in, what did Peter do? He grabbed the sword. What did he do? He cut off Malchus's ear. Who was Malchus? He was the high priest's servant. He wasn't going for his ear, he was going for his head. In that moment, let me tell you something. We talk about the denial of Peter. But Peter was willing to die. He told the Lord that before at the Lord's Supper. He says, I will die for you. And Jesus says, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. But in his mind, he was ready to die, and he was. In fact, they were outnumbered. But because they would have had plenty of soldiers to take, they knew there's 12 men. And old Peter took out a sword, and he was going to fight all of them. I think the record is they only had 2 swords between them, but he was going to use one of them. And he was going to fight out. He was going to fight to the death. But you know what happened? Jesus stopped him. See, Peter had his thoughts. He knew what he wanted to do. He had his plan down pat. He was going to fight them. And he was going to win, or he would die defending Jesus. And Jesus stopped him. And he reached down and got a hold of Malchus's ear, and he put it back on. I wonder how Malchus thought about that, because he felt the pain, and he saw Jesus take his ear that was severed, and he put it back on, and the pain just left, and he went like that, and his ear was back on again. I wouldn't want to be arresting Jesus if that would have happened. But anyway, there's a lot of things that went on, wasn't there? But Jesus said to Peter, put up your sword. They that live by the sword will die by the sword. And you know what? From that moment on, Peter walked afar off from Jesus. I think about this, because later on he's going to be at the fire, and the wee girl's going to say, well, you're one of the Galileans, you're one with Jesus. And he says, no, I don't know the man. And he does deny the Lord. But how did he get in that place? How did he get in just a few moments, just a matter of minutes or hours, certainly, that he went from being a defender of Christ, willing to die for Christ, to get to the place where he denies him, curses and denies that he knows him? Because there's a process of walking afar off. Now, why did he do that? Because he got upset. What do you mean, put up your sword? Lord, they're going to take you, and I'm going to defend you. Peter was zealous, and he had his own idea of what the will of God is and what he wanted to do. And Jesus just turned that thing on its head. Said, Peter, your plan is not my plan. Put up your sword. And I think in that moment, Peter was emotionally upset with the Lord. Have you ever been like that? Your motivation was right. You wanted to do a certain thing, and it was like somebody poured cold water on it, and you're thinking, and what happens? Then all your zeal is gone, and it's kind of like, well... And he got upset with the Lord. That can happen in your life. There's things that can happen. And you're scratching your head, Lord, I don't know. I thought it was going to go this way. And it's all turned on its head. And we were zealous for the things of God, and now we're just kind of like, what does it matter? And we walk afar off. You see, that can happen. Sometimes life will be difficult. Sometimes we're going to be in a position of doing something that is contrary to our desires. We saw this when Peter fought for the Lord. But also we see it when Peter was reinstated. And here in John, look here, John chapter 21. And we've touched on this before, but it's really important. And it's important because it's Peter. This is Peter's letter, right? First Peter. So if you look down at verse number 18, this is after... Peter was so discouraged. He says, I go fishing, even after the resurrection. He tells you that in John 21, down there in verse 3. Simon Peter said unto them, I go fishing. And they said unto him, we will go with you. He's going back to his old profession, back to being a fisherman, when Jesus said, from henceforth you shall catch men. But he kind of thought, well, the Lord's kind of done with me. Did you know that the Lord is never done with you? You see, we disappoint ourselves, and we think but it's what we think and what God thinks are two different things. And so he's out all night doing his own thing, and he was tired, been out all night with the nets. And so they see this guy standing on the beach, and he calls over to them, "Did you catch anything?" And they've been out all night and caught absolutely nothing. Now, that's a sore question. I've been out all night, caught nothing. I didn't want to talk to anybody about fishing. That's very, very disappointing. And then John says, that's the Lord. He puts his fisherman coat on. We'll talk about that on Wednesday night. The closer you get to God, the more clothes you put on. The further away from God, the more clothes comes off. So he puts his fisherman's coat. You think he would take your coat off to jump in the water. He puts his fisherman's coat on, then jumps in the water. And he comes ashore, and Jesus is there. You know what? Jesus has got breakfast on the grill. He's got bread and he's got fish. Where did Jesus get the bread? He probably looked at the stone and just turned it to bread. He could do that, you know. He probably just whistled and the fish kind of flopped up on the beach and he just took them and put them on the fire. But he was looking after the needs. They're starving. They've been out all night and Jesus is looking after them. They come round the warm fire in the cool of the morning and there's that beautiful bread and they can smell the fish frying. And anyway, they sit down and have this lovely breakfast. And then Jesus turns to Peter and he says to Peter, "Hey, Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, and there's the whole, I don't want to get into the whole detail of that, but there's a play on words there. Jesus saying, "Lord," or Peter, "do you agape me? Do you really sacrificially love me?" And Peter says, "Lord, you know that I philo you, and you know I have affection for you." And then he says that 2 times, and then the 3rd time Jesus says, "Peter, do you philo with me?" And so he turned it back on Peter, and Peter was kind of hurt. He says, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you."